Okay, so we mentioned the logs before, and log is a file, if you still remember. In the log, we record different kinds of actions we make in a transaction. So formally, a log is a append-only file that contains log records. It is a append-only, in other words, we cannot eliminate or delete some rows from the log. We can only add these records to the log file only. And we need to pay attention here because multiple transactions can run concurrently in the DBMS, and the log records for these different transactions can be mixed together, right? Because we have only one single log file in a DBMS. All the transactions will output the actions to the same log file. And after the system crashes, we can use the log to either redo some transactions that did commit. Commit means this transaction runs successfully. We also output all the records or data back to the disk, right? If the system crashes, we know this transaction runs successfully. We can redo them, right? We redo this transaction that did commit. At the same time, we also undo some other transactions that did not commit. They did not commit means they didn't finish the effects right back to the disk yet, and we will undo them to eliminate the effects. So we'll discuss in details in the following pages about how to use the log to help us to do the redo and with undo. Before we mention different kinds of records we can write in a log file, the format in a log file can record different kinds of actions. The first one is about start of a transaction. The start T denotes the transaction T starts or begins. This is one row or one line in a log file. Commit T means this transaction T has committed. Abort T means the transaction T has been aborted. So there are different rows in the log file. We will see them later. Before we mention that, we can change some values for some variables in our database systems, right? We mentioned we can do this input, write, read, and as well output. However, in log file, we can record these actions in a more simple way. We can use this TXV instead. This T is the transaction ID. It means transaction T, right? X is the variable ID. It means variable X. V is the value. You may wonder what's the value. The value is either an old value or the new value. We have mentioned that in a log file we can record either the before values or the after values of some of the variables about actions, right? So here for the undo logging, we will use this TXV record the old values before we do the action. What's the value for this X? So if you see one row in the log file TXV, it means transaction wants to update this X. However, its old value before we do the updating, its value is V. So with this line, we can know if we plan to do the undo, we have to recover this X to its old value, right? In this way, we can eliminate all the effects for its transaction T. Because this T is not committed, and we have to roll back to the old value for the X, right? This is V for undo logging, denotes the old value for the variable X. Okay, so this is the basic records we can see in undo logging. Besides the records, we also have some rules for this undo logging. The first rule we have is called write ahead logging. So if a transaction plans to modify an element like X, then this TXV records or the entry must be returned to the log file before this X is returned to the disk. So therefore it is also called before that record, and this V is called the old value. So if we plan to make some changes to this X element in the transaction T, before we make these effects real and write them back to the disk, we have to write this record to the log file. It's called write ahead logging. You follow me, right? In this way, we can make sure before we take effect of this act, we can know its old value, right? Another rule we have here is called late commit. If it's T commits, then commit T is the entry must be returned to the log only after all the changes by T are returned to the disk. Here we need to make sure if we see the commit T, it means this transaction is committed successfully and all the effects has been made to the disk. Only after we have make all the changes to the disk, then we can add one line for the commit T. You can follow me, right? For the undo login, to make sure this undo login will work, we have to follow these two rules. Write ahead login. Before we write something to the disk, we have to log this record TXV. Also, before we do the commit of the transaction, we have to make sure all the changes we make in the transaction has been made or returned to the disk already. In this way, this undo login will be effective. So therefore, these outputs are done earlier before we do the commits. Right? This is a secure or safe way for us for the undo login. Okay, so this is a rule for the undo as well. Record we can see in undo login. We provide you with the example.